How's it going, everybody? Wanted to thank everybody for their continued support on the channel and for all the pretty pretty awesome comments that I've been getting lately. I do appreciate the feedback that everybody's been giving me, so that definitely helps me understand the direction to take stuff and the content that people would like to see. So one of the things that I've been getting a lot of requests on lately, which kind of does make sense, is the details in regards to, I talk a lot about, and some of the previous videos that I've done regarding, CCNA to CCNP to CCIE preparation. How do you get from CCNA to CCNP, and then once you've achieved CCNP, how do you make the transition to CCIE? How do you prepare for IT certifications, things like that. Well, those are all well and good, but I've been getting a lot of requests lately, mostly via social media outside of YouTube, for people that are, whether regardless of where you are geographically. So if you're in the U.S., if you're in the European market, if you're in, the Asia Pacific region, Latin America, it really doesn't make much of a difference where you're from. It doesn't matter to me, or it shouldn't matter, your technical background, or your drive, because everybody's going to learn at a different pace and is going to use different ways to learn the technology that you want to learn. Well, one of the things that I've been asked quite frequently of, well, how do you prepare? And it's kind of a difficult question to answer. What books do you read? Do you read them cover to cover? Do you read them a specific chapter? How do you take your notes? I mean, a lot of those questions are very difficult for me to answer. I can give you what I do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that will work for you. So I decided to take and put together a small, kind of a guidelines video, if you will. So the very first thing you're going to want to do is determine what direction you want to go in. If it's Microsoft, VMware, Cisco, Linux, whatever. I don't really care. Maybe you're going to go become a an OpenStack developer, and create the next OVS, so Open vSwitch. I quite frankly don't care which direction you go in, and it's not my decision to make. It's up to you. At the same point in time, it's one of those things where, as you're going along and you're preparing to go into a particular track, do you understand the what the steps are to get from point A to point B? Point A being starting your certification or your track, and then point B is a bunch of material that you have to cover until you get there and you've passed the certification exam or the test or what have you. All that is great. It's the in-between stuff that I can't constantly get questions on. And again, it's really difficult for me to tell you, people ask me, well, should I go after this or that? A recent question I got was, should I go after CCNP Service Provider first, or should I grab CCNP Routing and Switching? I really can't tell you. I mean, maybe if you're telling me, if you're looking for me to tell you, go this way, then this way, then if you want me to tell you that, then something tells me that you already know the direction you want to go in. I'll tell you, I try to keep it as generic and as neutral as I can, because I don't want to point you in the direction and then you come back to me 6 months later and tell me it was a complete waste of time. But then again, you're asking me for my opinion, and you really can't hold my opinion against me. It's just because it's what I think, right? So first and foremost, pick a track. I decided to go headlong into routing and switching, and I'm really, really glad I did. And the main reason is I've learned pretty much everything there is to know about routing and switching. And in respect to the material that Cisco deems pertinent to the routing and switching track. Now, there's things outside of routing and switching that I don't know. There's certain aspects of EIGRP and BGP and OSPF that I'm not as familiar with, but that's okay, because I get the majority of it. And the majority was all I needed to need in order to pass my CCIE. So you take that into the next level. So you've picked the track, and now you need to focus on a specific area of that track. If you're brand new to IT, or you're brand new to that specialization, because if you ask me, routing and switching is really just CCNA. It's or CCNP or CCIE. If I say CCIE, I automatically assume you mean routing and switching, but I'll ask you, well, which track? Because there's right now there's 5 or 6 other ones that I'm aware of. So depending on the direction you're going in, you really need to understand what is expected of you along your journey. So go download the blueprint for that particular track. I would love to get into VMware NSX more, but I've got other personal goals and things like, for instance, studying for my written exam for service provider to me is more important right now than studying for my VCP in network virtualization. I will eventually get that, but that won't be happening for at least some time. Probably not till sometime later next year is my guess. But at any rate, that's one of my goals, right? So I know I've got like a roadmap of certs that I want to get in the near future. And when I say the near future, I'm saying the next 18 to 36 months. So it gives me a year and a half to 3 years to get this, this, and this. There may only be 3 or 4 certs, but they're probably not going to be low level stuff. No more of the CCNA or the CCNP. I'm probably just going to go right for the CCIE and a lot of stuff. But I don't know. That might change over time. But you really need to focus on a particular specialization. So what is a specialization? A specialization is taking what you already know from, let's assume that I'm going to assume that everybody watching this video has a CCNA, okay? If you don't, just know that that's you've achieved the CCNA and routing and switching, and then you are picking either to go deeper down the rabbit hole of routing and switching, so CCNP or CCIE, or you've made the left or right hand turn into like security or voice or wireless or service provider or data center or design. It's up to you in which way you go. But once you've made that conscientious first step into another track, for me, it's right now it's service provider. So I go into service provider, and my goal is to focus solely on that for right now. And as you can see on your screen, I have the documentation pulled up for layer 2 VPN. Now there's a pretty heavy concentration of layer 2 VPN on the service provider track. Now, and I'll get to why I'm going, or the way you would attack a certification here in just a minute. The thing that a lot of people have a hard time is picking an area of a topic of interest to study into, and that's a question that nobody can answer but you. So I personally like to deal with Cisco, VMware. That's kind of my niche, if you will, my niche. That's the direction I chose to go in, and it's been fairly good to me thus far. And that's the direction I chose to go in. Was it the right path? I think it was. I do. To me, growing up, it was computers. My dad was into computers. Got me interested in them at a very young age, and then it was, there was a period of time, in like middle school and high school, I was heavy into it, and I guess you could say I kind of got tired of it. And well, tired of it's a bad term. I had been exposed to it so much that I needed a break. Is more of a better way of putting it. And um, I went into the workforce as just just an everyday Joe. I was out there just doing a normal job. Work 8 to 5, punch the clock, go home, be done with the day. I'm married with kids, so that was pretty much my ritual. Go home, hang out with the family, and then go to bed and repeat the process over and over and over again. Well, I wasn't getting anywhere, and the direction I chose was to go back to school, and that's why I'm at the point where I'm at today. So when you, sorry for the tangent, but that's kind of the direction I chose to go in. When you choose a specialization, it's got to be something, and like I said, we're starting at routing and switching, and we're making a left or right hand turn. If you make a left hand turn and you decide to go security, great. If you decide to go wireless, cool. Now you have to make you've chosen your track. Now you need to go find some material online or through Cisco to start learning that material. First thing first, download the blueprint. Go to Cisco's website, go to training, click on CCNA or CCNP or CCIE, and download the blueprint, and then that is going to be your launching point. And then it's up to you to go through and I use the blueprint, which I don't have pulled up at the moment, but I can pull up here for that. And while I'm talking to you, I'll do that. So you pull up the blueprint for that particular track, and you start going through it. So the thing that really comes down, what it really comes down to is understanding what it is that you're going for. So pick the topic that you want to dig into, and then go for it. Is that difficult to do? It can be for some people, and I completely understand that. But at the end of the day, it's one of those things where you have to make the conscientious decision on, what to do. And nobody can do that for you. It's just the nature of the beast. So the key factor that really needs to be understood here is once you drilled down to it, then you need to go through and start focusing on the blueprint. So here, I've got the written exam blueprint pulled up, so I'll go ahead and bring this over. So this is the written exam blueprint, and this is for 4.1 because of the time frame of the year it is. And I've also got the lab exam, so I'll bring those up. I'll minimize my other screen. So we have the written exam here. It's 6 pages. There's a lot of material in here. So my goal right now is to go through this, and I'm learning everything on the written blueprint first. You might say, well, why are you doing that? Well, because then I know what it is that I need to cover, right? So I go through here, and right now I'm on service provider based services. Now you might ask, well, why that particular part of the blueprint? Fair enough. Well, mainly because of the fact that all this other stuff, the core routing, IGP, BGP, things like this, everything in here highlighted in blue, the majority of this stuff I already know. So why would I waste my time going back over it and put things on hold for a later time that I don't know? I'd rather move stuff that I don't know to the beginning of my preparation time frame where I'm going to have more motivation, more energy, more time to put into them, and then focus on things later on that I already know that I can just fill in. Let's say, for instance, you see right here, one of the characteristics here is the add path and BGP LS. Well, off the top of my head, I don't know what BGP LS is, right? And that's an honest God truth. I don't know what that is off the top of my head. So I would have to go look that up. So I'm not going to waste my time now to go look that up, even though I could. I'm going to wait for a time down the road when I'm going back through and I'm doing a deep dive through BGP to ramp up for the written and for the lab and go from there. Now, I'm going through the blueprint here, and as I mentioned, I'm going through this guy right here, and it's one of those things where you're being it's telling you what you need to work on. And the other thing that I want you to focus on here is the wording of the blueprint. Okay, this is really, really, really important. So if you're kind of half in or half out of this video, stop what you're doing and focus on me for just a minute. It says service provider based services, carrier Ethernet, right? It says describe, implement, and troubleshoot ELAN, right? Now, what does that mean to you? Whenever you see describe, implement, and troubleshoot, that is indicating to you that you need to know it more than just what it is. You need to be able to know how to configure it and to troubleshoot this in a pretty quick time frame. So that's for ELAN and E-tree, right? And E-line, VPLS, things like that. So they're actually using different terminologies here. E-line is virtual private wire service. ELAN and E-tree are VPLS and HVPLS. Now, pay attention to that aspect real quick, right? We had describe eVPN, wire service, and eVPN for PBB. And then they also have 802.1 AD and AH and G.8032. Now, one of the things, pay attention right there. It says describe eVPN, describe 802.1 AD, Q and Q, and 802.1 AH, MAC and MAC, or PBB. The reason why I point that out is because this one here is expecting you to know how to configure and troubleshoot it beyond just describing it. This one here is telling me that I need you to just describe it. Tell me what it is. How does it work? That type of stuff. The same thing with the L3 VPN. It's telling me to focus on describe, troubleshoot L3 VPN, inter-AS L3 VPN, multicast VPN, unified MPLS and carrier supporting carrier, shared services like extranet and internet access. They're expecting you to be very, very familiar with the more advanced concept of layer 3 VPN, which tells me there's going to be a very large concentration of L3 VPN on the exam. And that's going to give you an idea of how deep you should go with this. As you can see, the majority of the stuff here on the blueprint is telling me that I need to spend a lot of time on what? A lot of these are just describe, implement, and troubleshoot multi-VRF-CE, right? These are things that you really need to pay attention to when you're reading the blueprint. So now I come to my next point. Let's go to the lab. The lab says what? Core IGP routing, because you get rid of that, like the network principles at the top here. This is gone. This architecture and evolution. This piece it doesn't have any applicability in the lab. Now we get into core routing. So a quarter of the lab is going to be core routing. All this right here is considered to be core routing because it has to do with, depending on how you're moving forward with it, I can give you a pretty good example of how all this stuff comes into play in the lab exam. It's when you get into, there's going to be pieces in here that it's going to be troubleshooting. So one of the things that I want you to pay attention to between here and here, describe, implement, and troubleshoot E-line and E-LAN, right? Now, one of the things I want to be very clear here on is I don't work for Cisco, and I have nothing to do with the exam blueprint, and I have nothing to do with the exam delivery. But one of the things that I want to point out to you right here, in the written exam, you're going to be required to know EVPN, PBB, EVPN, AH, AD, all that type of stuff. You go to the same part of the lab exam. What do you not see? You're not going to be tested on PBB in the lab. It's a written only topic based off of the blueprint for the lab exam. So you're going to need to know layer 2 VPN, and probably the majority of it's going to be done on the CSRs because of the fact that those guys support the data plane. So you'll be able to do pings and traces and stuff like that over that configuration. One thing you'll notice here on L3 VPN is the majority of the stuff is covered, right? You get into, zoom out just a little bit, and you get the overlay VPN. Go into here, your overlays are still there. So you're going to be tested on this stuff pretty heavily. So in the lab exam, they're going to test you on point-to-point pseudowire, multi-point to multi-point, point-to-multi-point for E-tree, for a rooted point-to-point, and then they're going to get into other things like the advanced layer 3 VPN, and then they'll get into overlay VPNs, L2TPV3, Lisp, GRE, multi-GRE, things like that. Same thing here. They're going to be hitting you heavy on these topics. So even though my main focus is right here, right, making sure that I can configure them and troubleshoot them and things like that, I'm still covering the technologies here, right? So as I'm going through, I'm making sure that I understand how these components come together and how they work. Now, with all that being said, it's being able to understand what's on the written exam. If you understand what's on the written exam, or I shouldn't say the written exam specifically, if you understand what's on the blueprint for the exam, that'll help you kind of channel your preparation. I am making sure that I can configure this stuff just because of the fact that it looks cool. Now, I can tell you that eVPN PBB is only supported in iOS XRV, and the little bit that is supported, it's only supported in the control plane, and it uses BGP for MAC address propagation, not supported in the data plane. It's basically, you got to remember, XRV is just a route switch processor. It doesn't have the line card support for actual layer 2 encapsulation. So it doesn't support the data plane. It only supports the control plane. I haven't tested, I have a general understanding of how Lisp works, and I haven't had the chance to go into the details of how that goes into work, right? So one of those things that keep in the back of your mind, you will be tested pretty heavily on this stuff, and it's really important that you understand what it is you're being asked to do. So the one thing that I want to point out to you is your access and aggregation. This is your PE2CE routing. And on both sides, they're getting pretty heavy on what you need to be able to do. Now, describe broadband forum TR101. That's describing how broadband works. In the lab exam, you're not going to be asked about that. You're actually going to be tasked with actually implementing the configuration, but broadband won't be one of them. So I would still download the broadband, the BNG guide from both iOS and iOS XR, and still read through them. It won't hurt to do it. You know what I mean? So that's how to read through the blueprint and know what you're going through. Now, at the same point in time, I downloaded um, all of the what are these things called? The certification guides, or the configuration guides. Sometimes I get myself confused. So I downloaded all the configuration guides for all the major topics on the blueprints. Now, majority, like things like OSPF, ISIS, BGP, intra-AS L3 VPN, really basic L2 VPN, I'm already familiar with those areas. So I'm not wasting my time going through them right now. What I am wasting my time on, I shouldn't say wasting my time on, what I'm spending my time on right now is going through the components of making sure that I know how the stuff comes together. So what I do literally, and I'll show you exactly how I do this, just so everybody has, so we're all on the same page. So let me go ahead and zoom in here. Right now, one of the things that I'm working on here is understanding, like for instance, pseudo-wire redundancy, right? We come through here, and let me just go bring this down just a little bit. There's a bunch of individual components here that come into play. Now, pseudo-wire redundancy is in the respect that when if you have just a single line here, that there could be all these separate issues, x1, x2, x3, x4, right? The provider core to the provider edge, the attachment circuit connecting PE to CE, and then the CE. Now, if you come in here and you have one CE, two redundant attachment circuits, and then you have redundant primary and backup pseudo wires, one PE. What I'm doing is I'm literally going through and I'm creating each one of these scenarios and I'm blogging about them. Just because of the fact that I don't know what I'm going to see in the lab exam. There could be none of this in the lab exam. I honestly don't know. But it's important to understand all the different caveats and the conditions. I might have two different CEs. And depending on the situation, there might be a LAN segment connecting these two guys together. And then I would have to keep that in the back of my mind. If I'm two different CEs, one PE. Two different CEs, two different PEs. Sorry about that, phone rang. So you get a situation where you go through each one of these failure scenarios just so you have an idea of how they work. Now, am I going to put a blog post up about each one? Probably not. But I'm going to go through each scenario and talk about how each one can come into play. Like I could, very well, and then make it a really long blog post, but I don't know if I'm going to do that. So we go through this piece right here. So I read through the configuration guide, right? I read through the configuration guide and I go through and I'm picking out commands that I know will configure this. Now it says here, in order to configure layer 2 pseudo-wire redundancy, it says that pseudo-wire redundancy feature enables you to configure a backup pseudo-wire in case the primary pseudo-wire fails. When the primary pseudo-wire fails, the PE router can switch to the backup pseudo-wire. And then you can have the primary pseudo-wire resume operation after it comes back up, right? So it can have what they call it can preempt itself. So we have a situation like that. And we come down here a little bit further, and it tells me some of the optional configuration capabilities, like the encapsulation type is going to be MPLS. The control protocol that we're going to be using is LDP. And the payload-specific options, is it going to be Ethernet or is it going to be IP? Well, in this case here, I'm going to be doing internet working Ethernet or IP. It's going to, I believe, default to, this is an optional configuration. So if you're not sure what this command does right here, because sometimes the configuration guide doesn't get very explicit, so you can go to the command reference. So I can come in here, and I happen to have this one, and as you can see, one of the things that I'm studying through, and you can click on, is it this guy? Yeah, internet working IP. So give me a second here, folks. Internet working right here. So you come in here, it says internet working, and then you have Ethernet, IP, VLAN. And then you come through here, and so you get a syntax description. So when I come in here, I go, okay, Ethernet. So if I use internet working Ethernet on one side and the other, it says causes Ethernet frames to be extracted from the attachment circuit and be sent over the pseudowire. It is assumed that Ethernet has end-to-end transmission. Attachment circuit frames that do not contain Ethernet frames are dropped. In the case of VLAN, the VLAN tag is removed, which leaves a pure Ethernet frame. Now IP is it causes IP packets to be extracted from the attachment circuit and sent over the pseudowire. The attachment circuit frames that do not contain IPv4 packets are dropped. And so in this case here, I am, depending on the situation, and you can come down here for the usage, if you're going to go Ethernet to VLAN, you can use any of these. So typically I will default to internet networking IP, depending on the situation, and I'm able to leverage that. Now, that technically does not actually enable redundancy. Well, you get into the redundancy when you actually use the command here. It is configuring a pseudowire redundancy. So you literally connect. Now this is using the XConnect capability. This is limiting in the capability. You could use this and have a type in your XConnect command here, and then once you're underneath the XConnect configuration mode, you can then type in a backup here. So it'll be like if you were to look at the configuration, it would be XConnect 10.1.1.1. The BC ID would be 101, and then you could type in encapsulation MPLS, hit the enter key, and then you would be under XConnect config mode, and then from there you'd be able to type in the backup here. Well, we're not doing that in the configuration I'm using. I'm using the layer 2 protocol CLI, where you configure the service instance underneath the interface, right? You configure the service instance. You tell it that it's going to be what it's going to be rolling with, and then you can come in here and use a pseudowire, interface pseudowire, and then you can configure the encapsulation and the neighbor, and then go down and then have two different pseudowires. But when you do this, when you have two different pseudowires in a redundancy group, you have to put them in a redundancy group. So for instance, you could name it VLAN or Q&Q depending on the situation. So what I do is while I'm taking care of reading through the documentation, I actually pull up Notepad, and this is my Notepad that I'm currently working on, and I literally copy everything into Notepad. And if we scroll up here just a moment, we should see pseudowire redundancy. So what it does in this particular case is I would be able to come in here and configure it the way that I need to. So now I take this information here, and now when you're doing a service instance, it kind of makes things a little weird because the fact that with and I haven't actually done a blog post on that, and the reason why I haven't is making sure that I understand what's going on. So I'm testing it out right now to where I have a service instance and I have two different pseudowires. Well, I wasn't actually planning on doing a demo, but I'm probably going to do one just to show you what I mean. So when I go through and I configure the redundancy, I have two different pseudowire interfaces, but I map it to a gigabit interface number, but I don't specify a I don't specify a service instance. So if I was going to do redundancy, I could do that. So you get into a situation where you have to go through and make sure that you understand what's going on. In this particular case, it's configuring it the way that it makes sense, right? So if I take a topology here, and I'll go ahead and pull up the topology real quick for you guys. So right now, the way that I have this configured, and I'll go ahead and bring up the, bring this up. And I wasn't planning on doing a demonstration, but hey, what the heck, right? So here on R6, I'll go ahead and I will show a show run interface gig 2. So as you can see, I have a bunch of different service instances configured here. Well, you could do this, but this is for redundancy configuration, at least up to this point in my testing. It does work, but it gets a little hairy. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go, and one of the things to keep in the back of your mind is if you do the XConnect command at the global config, then you won't be able to apply that to the, you want to be able to do another XConnect underneath the subinterface. CSRs don't support that. So I'm going to type in interface gig 2.500, type in encapsulation.1q 500, right? And I'm going to exit out, and I'm going to come in here and type in interface pseudowire is going to be 500. The encapsulation is going to be MPLS. The neighbor is going to be 192.168.1.1 500. I then log out of here, and I come in and do another interface pseudowire, do 501 or 501. The encapsulation is MPLS, and that the neighbor is for 501. because now we have two different pseudowires, right? I exit out, and then what I could do is I type in L2 VPN Xconnect. The context here is going to be, I'll just put in red for redundant, and you type in the member of the group, member group 2.500, and then you type in member, and you type in member Pseudowire 500 and 501, right? And as you can see, the it says, it actually bugs out. It says invalid redundancy group. Does a member already exist? So you have to actually come in here and put them in a group. So I'm going to do here, I'm going to type in group is going to be red, and then you type in priority of 500 is this guy here, and the priority, the lower number win is better, so I'm going to type in 10, and actually I've got to actually do show run section L2 VPN. I've got a running debug here, and do a so L2 VPN. So as you can see here, this guy's already situated, so I'm going to type in no to this guy, right? Or is it this one? Right here. No member this guy, right? So I'm gonna blow this redundancy group away. I'm gonna type in member is gonna be Pseudowire 500, group is gonna be red, priority of 10, right? Alright, so let me go ahead and blow away that. Sometimes it's not always a good idea to have debugs running in the back end, but you know, you live and you learn. So I'm gonna go ahead and blow this guy away, right? So I'm going to type in L2 VPN Xconnect, context is going to be red, member is going to be group gig 2.500, member is going to be Pseudowire 500, group is going to be red, priority of 10. And then, so now that adds that in, so now all I'm going to do is come back here and type in 501 and 11, so it'll be the secondary, right? So now that one will be added as well. And then I come down here and I do a now. And one thing you'll notice too, and I'm glad it's I wasn't planning on doing a video for this, but a lot of the configuration won't actually be applied globally until you exit the L2 configuration mode, and then it'll start to work. So I'm going to go ahead and do. I'm going to wait a minute for this to come along. And as you can see, I've got 500, 501 here. We do a show L2 VPN Atom VC, you'll see that here and they're both down, right? And there's a reason for that, because R1 isn't configured, right? I'm going to do a show run section L2 VPN, and I'm going to take this information right here and I'm going to copy it over to the other side. And I'm going to open up Notepad real quick and copy and paste that in. I'm going to do a show run Pseudowire, and Pseudowire configuration is right here. Just like that. And then the show run interface gig 2.500. And there you go. So now we'll have all the configuration set up here. One thing I recommend you do is continue to use Notepad if you currently are. So show run interface gig 2. As you can see, I have a service instance set up here, right? I'm going to go to global config. I'm going to type in interface gig 2.500, and I'm going to copy and paste this config in like so. Exit out, and then I'm going to scroll up here to the Pseudowire configuration and get him situated. That gets those guys configured, right? And then I go back up to the top here, and I grab this syntax right there, and then copy and paste this in as well. It says cannot use the local IP. That is correct. So actually, let me go ahead and type in .6 and .6. I'm sure you guys are like, you're typing in the wrong information. Yeah, I'm so sorry. Sometimes I make silly mistakes. So there we have it. So now we're going to be able to come down here, and now R6, there should be a ton of information spewing. So this guy is going like crazy, and now you should see these guys starting to come up, and you'll see the redundancy group kick into play, and all this up on the back end. If we come over here and do a show L2 VPN Adam BC, you should see that 501 is up, and this other one guy here is in standby. Now, normally what you would do is the standby guy, or the 501 would be using the LDP path through the core, and 500 would have a MPLS traffic engineering tunnel associated to it, so that it would take a different path through the network. So it would have an explicit path. So instead of both of them more than likely taking the same path through the network, you'd have a different path through the core in case of a failure. Now this configures redundancy in the respect of R1 to R13, and then from R6 to R10, right? Now if I was to go to R10 and go to config T and then go to interface do show IP interface brief, interface gig 1.500, type in encapsulation.1q500, IP address of 192.168.50.10/24. I'm running OSPF on all interfaces already, so I don't have to worry about that. And I'm going to go over to 13 and do show run interface gig 1.500, and just grab this information right here and drop this into here like so. It's a different interface ID on the other side, that's why I had to be careful what I do. And gig 2.500 and on R13, and then it says that a duplicate address was already configured. Oh, you know what? That's my mistake. That's a good sign though. That's a really good sign. So now I can actually come in here, and you're like, dude, you did it again. Yeah, I know. I make a silly mistake. Silly mistake. So we have that, and now we have OSPF has now formed an adjacency. If I come down here and do a show IP OSPF interface brief, you can see that gig 2.500 has got an OSPF peering here, right? That's a good sign. This tells me that the connection between the two sites is up and running, and that's how I would go about doing that. Now, like I said, it's that type of configuration to where if something was to happen internally in the core, I would have a redundant path in the network. So it gets into Pseudowire redundancy. So now I could take this to the next level and say maybe I have a secondary connection to R13, or maybe I'm using XR1 to get to R13 and I have a secondary path. You know, these are things that obviously it wouldn't make sense for me to do this from the data plane perspective. I would normally do this from like R1 to R5 and 6, where 5 would connect to 10 as well, and I would have redundant paths that way. But at the end of the day, it's up to you to figure out how you want to go about doing that. So R5 having a secondary path to R10 as a second attachment circuit, or maybe I do 5 to 9. So maybe I do a dashed line here like this to 10 for one of the scenarios, and then I use 5 and 6 to peer to 1. Now you still want to still test this out on the XR boxes, right? Data plane is not supported, but if you run the debugs, you will see that the control plane does work, and works 100%. It gets up and running. Pretty much every configuration option that I've tossed at it, it supports. There are a few that it does not because of the the nature of the platform. But here I can test all these different characteristics out, so I can have the redundancy in the place here, and then I can flip back and forth. I would recommend testing this out at the port level, which means that you are configuring this at the main interface. I recommend doing it at the VLAN level. VLAN being you type in a .1q subinterface, like I just did. You also have the Q&Q model. Q&Q model is where you are taking a double stack VLAN. So you would have .1Q10, second .1Q20, something along those lines. And then you could take those and start playing around with their configuration options. Really what you're doing is you're trying to test all the different scenarios that you could be tested on in the lab exam, so that when you get to the lab exam or you're in the written exam and you're asked about them, you'll be able to identify what they're talking about. So that's what really comes down to it, is the E in CCIE is testing all these different scenarios out. Am I going to do this for every possible scenario as I go forward? I don't know. But because the fact that this is a big portion of the exam, I'm taking my time on it. And it shouldn't take very long, but then again, it's time to dig into it and really understand what it is that they're looking for you to do. So XR is very easy to configure as well. It's just a matter of you getting in there and playing with the different configuration options. So that's one of the things you really want to pay attention to and understand what it is that you've got going on. Read through the documentation, make sure you understand the theory behind the solution, behind the feature, what it does. And then go through the command line on the box itself and see what options are there. If there are sub-feature options that you're not familiar with, go ahead and look them up. The worst case scenario is there's stuff in there that is not documented, and you can in some ways be that much better off. So how far you need to take it is really up to you on how much you want to know. But that's the type of work that I'm doing and getting stuff to work and stuff like that. It's really cool. Now, so far I've tested R1 and R6 have a Pseudowire. They have one this way, and they have one this way. Right, so we have these two different Pseudowires. Now, I don't know what path it's taking in the network. No clue. My assumption is it would be taking the same path, but I would be able to configure, say for instance, LDP is having it go this way, something along those lines, and I might want to have traffic engineering take it this path. You could do this one, I could do this one. You could have multiple explicit paths, then you could use the dynamic one and let LDP figure it out. I'll be coming back once I get through layer 2 point-to-point, layer 2 multi-point, and get through that. Once I get through the LDP and BGP discovery, HVPLS, and things like that. Once I get through the MPLS core functionality through both the written and the lab, then I'll fall back and I will. Well, actually, I'm sorry. I'll do the IP encapsulated version. So I'm planning on throwing like VXLAN is in here. I'm planning on doing a demonstration of how that would come into play, because it is applicable here. It could be used as a data center interconnect, things like that. And then that's going to be another piece that comes into play that needs to be understood as well. And then you could take a look at, once we get into the IP encapsulated stuff, we'll take a look at VXLAN because it doesn't necessarily need MPLS. And then I'll do layer 3 VPN in the intra-AS style setup, and then we'll get into the, then I'm going to be tossing in multicast from QoS, and I'm trying to think here what else there is. I'm planning on it to where I do as many things on one topology as I can, as long as it works. And then I'll come back and I'll do a secondary multi-inter-AS. So there might be 3 or 4 inter-AS configurations that need to be done, and then we'll take a look at how that will come into play and see how those roll out. So those are that's what I'm working on right now. So it's a lot of work to go through all the different scenarios, but that's really what you're going to be tested on. Because I don't want to get in the lab and go, not sure what they mean. Because then if I can look at what they're talking about and read through the documentation, they're going to be pulling stuff out of the documentation. So as long as you read through it, you're probably going to be hitting on something that you're already familiar with and go, oh, okay, I know what that is. And so you'll be that much better off to dig into it. And that's basically what I'm doing. So I hope this video was informative for you. And this is this type of stuff that I'm going to continue to put out on a pretty regular basis, on little details and things like that might help you guys out in the future. If you have any questions as to stuff that you would like to see covered that hasn't been covered, I know there's a question posed for service provider for the stuff that I'm doing for CCIE. I will be doing RIP and EIGRP, and not a ton of detail, but enough to get the job done in case you're going to be doing summarization or authentication or something like that for SP. I will be covering those topics as well, and IPv4 and IPv6 through the entire scenario, all the scenarios. So right now I'm just using V4 because it's simpler, but V6, everything I've done for V6 has been applicable. So we'll take a look at exactly how that comes out later on. So until next time, guys, take it easy, be nice to each other, and if you have any questions or comments, would like to see anything covered, drop a line in the comments below. Hit that subscriber link if you're passing through and you'd like to keep up to date with all the cool stuff that I'm working on. Until next time, guys, take it easy.